one of the fundamental messages, or a couple of fundamental messages of Islam is the mercy of God, and then also Tawheed, which means the oneness or the interconnectedness of things. This is actually a slide of Katrina coming in. I stole it right off the web, but that's a slide of Katrina coming in. But the unity of creation is something that shows up a lot in the writings and also in the Quran. There's a verse that I like to read. When I looked at this, I thought of a verse. It's chapter 30, 24, verse 24. And among his signs, he shows you the lightning by way of both fear and of hope. And he sends down rain from the sky, and with it gives life to an earth after it is dead. Verily, in that are signs for those who are wise. One of the things that the Islamic religion does is it tells us to read and think and recite and contemplate and reflect. The Quran often says, for those who reflect, for those who reflect, for those who reflect. So there's a lot of things there about just think about it. Look out the window and think about it. Islamic scholarship, of course, is supported by both the Quran and the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And if you look at the very opening verse of the Quran, chapter 96, verses 1 through 5, I don't know if you've gone through much of studying the Quran yet, but that was the first revelation. So the Quran's not in chronological order. But this one I wanted to read to you because it's important, because it talks about the pen and writing and learning and teaching and reciting. So it says Iqra, which means it can be translated as recite or proclaim. Or read, recite, proclaim, those words are all sort of interconnected. In the name of your Lord, who created the human being from a mere clot of congealed blood, recite, your Lord is most bountiful. He who taught the use of the pen taught the human being that which he knew not. So right from the beginning, Muslims are told, read, recite, write, study, reflect. The Quran even instructs us to pray for knowledge. Chapter 20, verse 114 says, do not approach the Quran in haste ere it has been revealed unto thee in full, but always say, O my Lord, cause me to grow in knowledge. So the point being, there's a lot of religious sort of thrust towards studying and learning. There's actually 3 primary areas where Muslims are supposed to be focusing their efforts in terms of learning and studying. First one, of course, is religious knowledge. Second one is knowledge of the self. We've tossed out the word nafs every once in a while, the self. And it's used as a self, and it's used in the terms of ego, but it's knowledge of yourself and how you relate to God and the world around you. So that's the second knowledge. And then the third one, which is the one that our textbooks cover a lot, and I'll actually be talking about it today, is scientific knowledge. But religious knowledge comes first, and then knowledge of yourself, because you can't really deal with other people until you've dealt with yourself. You know, if you're okay with yourself, then you'll be okay with the rest of the world. But if you're not okay with yourself, you're going to have problems with the rest of the world. So that's the second area. The hadith are kind of another thing that I actually put these up in my classroom, and students walked in like, whoa, where'd that come from? But those who leave home in search of knowledge walk the path of God. Seek ye knowledge from the cradle to the grave, and seek ye knowledge even unto China, which is a reflection of how early the trade routes were already spreading. So one of the things that I talk about in my class a lot is the transfer of knowledge along trade routes. I mean, that's the way it's going to go, is along the trade routes. One of the things that's coming up in books a lot is a place called Baitul Hikmah, which I'll talk about in a minute. But which was a place called the House of Wisdom, where they were trying to gather together knowledge. But a lot of people kind of ignored Jundishapur, which was actually before Baitul Hikmah. Jundishapur was in Iran. You can see, it's over here in red. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right there. But one of the things that happened is in the 3rd century CE, one of the King Shapur, an Iranian Persian king, married a Christian princess who was actually the daughter of a Roman emperor. And they started a city, they developed a city, made it as cosmopolitan for that time as it could be. And they had translation centers where they translated things from Greek into Syriac into another language called Pahlavi. And then they also studied medicine there, and they also had a medical school and a library. And the goal of that place was to try to summarize all the knowledge that they could get their hands on. And that's going to happen again later on in Baghdad. Actually, keep in mind, in terms of geography, the location of Iraq and Iran, because they're very much on a sort of a pathway between Europe and the rest of and the East. I mean, they're strategically placed in terms of trade routes and transfer of knowledge. Jundishapur fell to the Muslims in the year 636. And one of the things that happened was there was a dynasty called the Umayyad Dynasty in Damascus, and they supported the scholarship down here in Jundishapur. So people were going back and forth between these two places, taking scholars with them and taking books and manuscripts and trading knowledge. So one of the things that happens is that this becomes a major link in this transfer of knowledge that happens. And keep in mind that by the 8th century, the mosque is by then the center of learning. There aren't schools, they're mosques. If you want to go learn something, you study it. Just like in Europe, there weren't schools, there were cathedrals. And the males went to school at the cathedrals. The females didn't have an opportunity to do that. Unless if they became nuns, they had opportunities to study, but not as much as the males did within the cathedral schools. And same thing happens in the Islamic world, the mosque becomes the center. So what happens is that you've got schools that have a mosque within them, and then you have mosques that have a school within them. So you've got that in terms of the architecture, which we'll be looking at tomorrow. Strong links between religion and education are going to be reflected in the art and the architecture as well. But by the 8th century, you've got Islamic rule from Spain to China. So if you looked at a map, you'd see we're looking at the Silk Road. Because by 711, the Spanish are in Spain, and by 751, there's a Battle of Talas in China that opens up the road to China. And it's in northwestern China that battle takes place. But one of the other things to consider is what's happening in the European world as well, because that actually helps Islamic scholarship get a boost. And by that, what I mean is this is a picture of Emperor Justinian, but the situation in Byzantium was kind of around the 6th, 7th century was not a pretty picture, because that's when, have any of you studied the councils, like the Council of Ephesus and the different councils where the Christians are trying to decide who are we and what do we believe? And that's, students kind of think, one morning Christianity bloomed and everybody said, okay, we're Christians today. And Rome said, okay, we just turned Christian. And Constantine said, okay, I'm a Christian. And it took centuries for these people to figure out what they believe in and what their practices are. And St. Thomas of Aquinas is the one that's going to really put that in writing. But during the 6th, 7th century, it was getting brutal with these meetings that they called councils. And one of the things that happened was a lot of people that were Syrians, who also became Syriac Christians, who also became Nestorian Christians, were excommunicated from the church. And they were being killed. They were being persecuted and they were being killed. So they did something that helped the Muslims. They moved east to Syria and to Persia, or to present-day Iran. And the Muslims ended up benefiting very much from this Byzantine disunity because they got the scholars. So the Jewish scholars, the Christian scholars, those who were being persecuted headed east because they knew that under Muslim rule they would be protected. Because the Quran says that these people are dhimmi. I don't know if you've had that word yet, but they're protected people. So ironically, they were more protected under the Muslims than they were under the Christians in the Byzantine area, at least. So they kind of kicked off a whole lot of other scholarship as well. The Nestorians are important people. There was a Bishop Nestor who had questioned the nature of Christ. That's the debate that was going on. Is Christ one? Is Christ three? Is God Christ? Is Christ God? Is that all one? Monophysites were saying there's only one body. Monophysics, Monophysites. And the Bishop Nestor was saying that Jesus is not the Son of God, and his Nestorians started being killed at that point. So that, as I said, ironically ended up helping the Muslims. In the 9th century, the city of Baghdad ends up becoming the center of trade, court culture, and scholarship. Because again, a lot of people are going there to study in a place that's called the Baitul Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom. And the House of Wisdom is built in 830, and that follows along the tradition of Iran, of let's have a place where we're going to gather together scholars of all religions, all faiths, and bring them together. And if you know about astronomy and you know about math and you know about medicine, come on in. So that's what they ended up doing.